Okay, great. That's all set. Thank you. I see everyone on the panel is on camera. Thank you. Okay, so I want to say great. Hello and welcome to the Islandora Deployments Method panel. We've gathered a panel of folks today together who have Islandora deployment experience, with the goal of giving everyone here an opportunity to ask them any questions you have about deployments in general. So this is a chance for you to ask some of those questions about the methodology so that your institution can evaluate deployment options for their needs. This session assumes that all these methods are part of our community and that they provide institutions with options. So this is not a place to disparage any particular deployment method. Disparage might be a harsh word, but I hope you get the idea. We're not here to compare the methods outside of the context of what you as users need to consider for your institution to use a particular one of them. So all the deployment methods have worked for different institutions with differing requirements, and I'm hopeful that folks today will leave with a better understanding of what your institution or group might want to use for deploying Islandora 2.0 based on your particular set of needs. So this is a great setup. I didn't know you could do this with Zoom. So today we have with us Luke Taylor from Discovery Gardens, Alexander O'Neill from the University of Prince Edward Island, Noah Smith from Born Digital, Aaron Birkland from Johns Hopkins University, and Eli Zoller from Arizona State University. And I know that there's probably people in just watching along today that also have the ability to answer some of these questions, so also feel free to jump in. So if each of you wouldn't mind giving a brief intro about yourself, your role, and which deployment method or methods you've used, that would be great. And I thought we could start with Luke.
Hi, I'm Luke Taylor. I'm the DevOps manager with Discovery Garden. I've been working with Islandora for 10 years now, and have dealt with a variety of deployment methods.
Thank you. Alexander.
Hi, I'm Alexander O'Neill from UPEI. I have quite a long history with a big gap in it of working on Islandora. I was one of the original 2 developers, along with Paul Pound here at UPEI, who created Islandora. And then I went off to work at Stanford University and Highwire Press for a while doing Drupal development there, kind of putting what I learned to use on like very large, high traffic sites. And then I moved back to Canada a few years ago, and UPEI saw fit to hire me back. So here I am again working on Islandora, and happy to be back.
Thank you. Noah?
Yes, I'm Noah Smith. I'm the founder and sort of technical architect here at Born Digital. We were heavily involved in making the IL7 project happen, and then converting that momentum into momentum for IL8. But before that, we did a lot of bare metal server installs and Ansible server installs, and all of that is what drove us to look for a better mousetrap. So we've tried them all also. And I wish I was where Eli was, where t-shirt weather was still, a thing.
Me too. It is cold here in the Northeast today. Aaron?
Yep, I'm Aaron Birkland, Johns Hopkins, and so we I've been in the Fedora community for a long time, and witnessed the birth of Islandora years ago, but I haven't actually been involved with running it or deploying it until the last year or two. So we jumped into the foray with Islandora 8, now I think rebranded as 2, and also kind of jumped straight into the fire by deciding that we would run our production instances of Islandora in Kubernetes, and use ISLE for primarily development purposes. So that's kind of where we are. Bit of an oddball.
Thanks, Aaron. And Eli?
I'm Eli, and I'm a software engineer at Arizona State University. I've been working in Islandora for a few years now, and we primarily use Ansible for deployment.
I should have mentioned that we also did a Kubernetes thing for the Quark folks, and that project has just recently been open sourced. I'll dig around and see if I can find that link, because I think there are some folks who are interested in that.
Great, thanks. And I realized I never introduced myself. I'm Bethany Seeger, and I'm a software engineer, and I'm also at Johns Hopkins, and I work with Aaron. And I'm also on the Islandora Coordinating Committee, which is where we thought of trying to do this type of panel. So what I thought we could do with this for people watching, if you have a question and want to raise your hand through Zoom, then I can call on you and you can ask your question directly, or if you'd rather just put it into chat, I will read them off as they come in. And I thought I prepared a couple of questions while folks are thinking about it. So at any point in time when you have a question, just electronically raise your hand. One of my first questions, and I think it's probably on a lot of people's minds, is why did you choose a particular deployment method you did? And I know some of you are using multiple deployment methods, so if you could talk about that, that would be great. And maybe we can just go in the same order, starting with Luke again. And also to, like, I realize a question like this applies to everybody. If the question doesn't apply to you, if you just want to pass, feel free to say that. And I think you're on mute still. Yep.
Sorry, my bad. We've dealt with a variety of deployment methods. Currently, our primary method is Puppet, and we use that with a control repo with Puppet Enterprise that basically all of our development environments are in this one control repo that we use to basically orchestrate going from development to QA to production. We also have done ISLE deployments. We've also done manual, and the reasons behind doing some of these is because a lot of clients will work within certain contexts and others will not. We've had people who have said they can't or won't do Docker. We've had some people who want a manual install so they can have like all the documentation and kind of manage it on their own going forward. And for us, a lot of it is just dealing with their existing workflows and just the way we've had things set up and they've always worked and we just kept kind of going with them. With that being said, we actually are very interested in Docker. I mean, there's clearly a lot of benefits with Docker, and there's also some challenges as well. So we actually have, we brought in a consultant who's working with us who we went over all of our various use cases and we reviewed ISLE, and we found it didn't quite suit everything we were trying to do. And we actually are building a Docker setup ourselves as well. That's coming along nicely. So yeah, I guess with that being said, we have a variety of methods. We also make heavy use of, in Amazon, we make heavy use of CloudFormation, the CDK, we have Lambdas, we have a number of things that we use for deployments. We use Composer to manage Drupal, which I'm sure everybody else does. We keep our configuration in version control. So like we don't necessarily always like use the same database. We actually manage our configuration and everything's peer reviewed as it goes through from start to finish. We've done a lot of work with scaling, breaking things apart in different ways. And yeah, there's a lot of different challenges and they can vary depending on the organization. I don't know if you need it more than that, or if that's kind of a good start to the conversation, or.
I think that's a great start. Hopefully that'll percolate some questions.
Okay.
And Alexander? And the question.
Yeah, repeat the question, sure.
So why did your institution choose a particular method for deployment that they did?
Okay, so we are using the Ansible scripts that have been sort of mostly because, well, when we started using Islandora, that was the only one, but also we found that Ansible, and when you say Ansible, it's a couple of different things. It's a automated automation platform that you can use for mostly configuration management and also orchestration. That means you can keep track of your configuration in one place, have it be version controlled, like Luke said, that's really important. And you can combine configurations for your common infrastructure, and those can be stored as one file in version control, and then you can have a separate inventory for a custom server that has a slightly different setup or located in a slightly different place. So we have some compute resources from Compute Canada, and we have access to their cloud resources, which are Ubuntu server images that we can connect to remotely. So we can deploy to that just as easily as we can deploy locally or to deploy to other infrastructure. And so when we were looking at like Ansible and what it was doing for Islandora, we sort of saw, we also need to automate our other tasks outside of Islandora. And we have a really capable but really, really busy system administrator who has taken to using Ansible for doing things like distributing changes that have to go out all at once to different servers. So the really nice thing about Ansible and automation platforms in general is you can adopt them slowly and use them to meet your needs gradually, and slow as you get comfortable with automating more and more of your workflow, it can become a much more powerful tool. And then the Islandora Ansible scripts that exist now can let you deploy to your existing infrastructure, to infrastructure that your IT department has control over, for example, and make it fit within the needs that you have in particular for your institution. So we're a small institution. We have a lot more plates in the air than we'd probably like, but this automation and control over configuration management has been really quite helpful for us.
Thank you. Noah?
For us, like Luke, we're running, a number of different installations for a number of different institutions, and we ultimately arrived at the conclusion that we needed consistency in order to be efficient with that work. And so for us, looking at Docker, arriving that Docker was the only sort of viable solution for us, came from a need to be able to swap out the dependencies of Islandora. Really, the need was to separate Drupal from everything else, right? We need to be able to upgrade any part of the everything else on the fly without touching any other part. And we need to be able to do it over and over again on servers if, a series of little updates come out. And with Docker, you can do that. You just grab you build a container, and then you can use it on locals, test things. You can pull it through to remote environments. You can have the same code, the same code, build the same image, and then use those same images everywhere to power your Cantaloupe server, for example, or any of the other services of Islandora. And then there's all sorts of amazing things you can do if you combine CI/CD with Docker images around how Drupal is handled as well, in terms of automatic deployments and config management, et cetera, et cetera. So for us, it's not just an IL solution. IL is sort of where it starts, and then CI/CD is where the real magic is in terms of automated deployments and testing and so forth.
Thank you. Aaron?
Yeah, I would say that for us, the decision to deploy in production in Kubernetes reflects the sensibilities and choices of our operations team. You know, like that was the platform that you know, our institution has made a decision to explore, you know, in other contexts for other stacks. And so, you know, we kind of had started a pilot for deploying the Islandora stack in Kubernetes. On the development side, we've been using Docker and Docker Compose for a while. So ISLE was a good fit as far as the development and CI workflows. And so basically, you know, this is kind of, you know, touching on some themes mentioned already, but we have the Drupal code base and configuration in GitHub, so the configuration is committed and what have you, and we ultimately use the composer.json and the export of Drupal config to create a Docker image with all of that baked in. And so when we're developing, we can make changes to, you know, tweaks to configuration in Drupal configuration, commit it, and then our CI will build a Drupal image with all of that baked in that just needs to be deployed. And, you know, whatever Drupal instance, you know, whatever instance it gets deployed to, you know, the configuration changes will occur there when it boots back up. So, you know, in our workflow, nobody actually touches the administrative interfaces on a live running instance. It's all done from the developer side. Commits are made, and then GitHub Actions can spool up a stack just fine, you know, with Docker Compose, run a variety of end-to-end tests. We use Test Cafe, which, you know, is kind of analogous to Selenium. So we have so simulates a browser clicking through various parts. Because our biggest concern is just making sure that configuration changes don't break anything. So we rely heavily on CI to do that. So, you know, developers are working in a local Docker environment, commit to Git, and then CI will build a set of images, run tests and everything, and then that is and then those images are deployed to a container registry. Now, as far as the other hop to letting operations know, we operate, we're wrapping up our development phase. And so now we tag all the images. So all the images, so the different microservices and what have you, like those are created by ISLE build kit. All those images plus our Drupal static image, which is what we call it, that's the Drupal image that has all the configuration baked in. All those are given a single tag. And so we can say to our operations team, okay, deploy 1.5.3 to test. And then boom, those Docker images will be deployed on test. And when it bootstraps itself, it will update the configuration, update modules, fire hooks, and everything else, because it's all baked in. And we have a startup process that runs update DB, which causes Drupal to run any hooks that are necessary. And so we try to, so our CI will do all of that as part of a build. So that kind of gets us confident that any configuration changes or updates or whatever are tested in CI first, and then poked at manually in the test instance before it can be deployed into a production instance. So we have a nice little workflow that that developed, but ultimately the choice to have a heterogeneous the development environment in Docker Compose and ISLE versus production in Kubernetes, was made to reflect the sensibilities of our operations team and the sensibilities of our development team, and kind of meet in the middle by tossing images over the fence. So that's it in a nutshell for us.
Thank you, Aaron. Eli?
So I think Alex kind of touched on this a little bit. With originally IL for the newest version of Islandora wasn't a thing yet, at least when we started developing our site or sites. So Ansible was kind of the only choice. So we did a few things to sort of make that work. So for our local development environment, we ended up creating our own base image, our base box for Vagrant. So that was something that for a while the Islandora community had also been maintaining one, but it's no longer doing that. But we created our own version, and we did that so that multiple developers could run, Vagrant up and spend 3 or 4 minutes waiting for the base box to be pulled down onto their machine and then have a running site, versus spending an hour for the Ansible build to go through every single step. So that was one thing we did to sort of improve our development workflow with Ansible. And then moving into our staging and production, we forked the Islandora playbook. And in Ansible, you have inventories, and by default, you get the one for Vagrant. So we added inventories for staging and production so that we could use Ansible to push to our staging and production environments. And then we did things like added custom roles to add services or customize the Drupal installs as we needed to, and things like that. And then the other sort of big thing that we did was we wrote separate Ansible playbooks to actually create and update components in AWS. So, for example, we wanted to spin up, 3 EC2 instances and create these security groups that are attached to these EC2 instances, and create load balancers and have them open on these ports and to these IPs and things like that. So we wrote Ansible scripts to spin up all of our cloud infrastructure and connect all the pieces there that we then run the playbook against to actually deploy the software to it. And that's what we've been doing for a while now. We've had some sort of scaling issues where we've, added a server here or there to, add a second set of microservices or something like that. So I can definitely see, the potential for something like Kubernetes or some other sort of more advanced scaling techniques that might be able to do some things more automatically like that. Yeah, for now, that's what we've done with Ansible, and maybe we'll move to Docker in the future.
I'm looking to see if there are any hands raised, but I don't see any. I think that Eli and Aaron touched on this a little bit. So I'm really curious about what folks have done for working with the development side of your website and the production side. Aaron alluded to this, that we have some systems ops folks and we have developers, and we each wanted different things. So we deploy with Kubernetes, but we develop with Docker directly. Do any of you other folks here have experience with that? And have you done anything different for your developers versus when you're in production? And I think if you just want to come off mute and speak, that's fine.
I can start, I guess. I've been continually evaluating IL and Docker as it gets updated, and I use Docker for other projects. And mostly my development is lives on, Composer you're running the same Composer project, depending, it doesn't matter if you're running inside a virtual image or not. Sometimes I even just run it directly on my Mac if I want, like, to just have really fast updates and not deal with a bunch of moving parts that aren't totally of concern right now. And also VirtualBox for Mac has been a little bit slow to update and stay up to date with OS updates lately. So I tend to just keep all different types of environments running out of curiosity, and have workflows that can work fine with all of them.
For us, again, we were going for consistency. So we're using Docker across the board and Docker Compose specifically in almost all instances. On that Quark project that I linked, we are actually still running locals on Docker Compose, but all of those methods are using the same images, which are built, the vast majority are built from BuildKit. We don't modify those. We just use the ones that the IL BuildKit project makes available. With the exception, as Aaron said, of the Drupal image, which is built sort of bespoke for each project. We do, for locals, run a bind-mounted code base folder, right? So your Drupal root is bind-mounted in on locals, whereas on remotes for us, we build a full image that has, Composer installed, Sass built out into CSS, all those other optimizations that you'd want in a remote production instance are baked into that image. So we just deploy that fully baked optimized image to our remote environments.
So here we use in development, it's Vagrant and Puppet, as well as we have a Drupal project with generated lock files, and we have configuration in a repository, and we also regularly export configuration from production because people sometimes do make changes in production. I mean, in the best case scenario, it'd be nice to, like in Aaron's scenario, is basically tell people they can't change anything in production, but I mean, that's not always the case. People like changing things, and we've been trying to strike a balance in some scenarios of restricting permissions to areas where we won't necessarily try to manage. In other cases, some clients like changing everything. So it has led to frequent configuration exports to keep things consistent in development. Within production, like I said earlier, we use CloudFormation and Lambdas to manage different aspects. We also make use of a tool called SSM, Systems Manager, with Amazon. We actually use that across the board, even for people on premise. If we're managing their instance, that basically can keep track of what the patch and security level is of various things, and provides us with an inventory of everything. And it can work like across, you don't have to be an Amazon to use it, I guess is what I'm saying.
Thank you. I'm looking to see if Aaron or Eli wanted to add anything to that. So if you had any further thoughts on workflows. You made me think when you were talking, Luke, about monitoring tools. And so I'm curious about what folks are using to monitor their production sites that are out there. And how easy or hard was it to hook that up for your site? And this time I'll mix things up and start with Eli.
We use a tool called PRTG for monitoring, and so you can do a variety of different monitors with that. You can do HTTP kind of requests. You can also do more low-level things like checking if a service is running on a particular server, that kind of stuff. So we use that to monitor, is Fedora up, is Zoller up, that kind of stuff. And we have it all connected with a Slack channel that sends us notifications when things aren't going well. So that's typically what we use for monitoring.
Does that bring your logging together as well from all the different services?
No, we use Splunk for log aggregation, and we typically just send application logs there. And that's actually like a university-wide thing. So yeah, it's sort of an enterprise thing where everybody puts their logs in for everything, basically.
And Aaron?
Yeah, well, I would say that our monitoring and like the observability story is currently still fairly immature and unsatisfying. We use Graylog for aggregating and searching all the logs of the various containers. We use metric beats for keeping track of resource usage and stuff like that. But there are still definitely a number of pain points that we have not had time to invest in. In particular, the observability as to what happens, like what's happening on the microservice side, when we do a large ingest or something like that, and just understanding whether or not the overall state of things is working, has landed in a good place, or if there are certain kinds of failures of systematic failures of derivatives. Right now, the process, our process for figuring that out is still immature and not particularly satisfying right now. There are a number of areas to explore. I mean, we're in Kubernetes, and so we could explore using something like Istio or a service mesh for being able to kind of add some observability to the communication that happens between the different microservices that are running. But I think having some higher level observability as far as the into the state of the queues, and see how many failures there are, or how regular there are, exposed and logged, exposed in a secure way, or logged and searchable in a nice way. We're just not there yet. Like we still have to, figure some way to look at the ActiveMQ console and take a look at the status of the queues, which is not particularly a pleasant or streamlined process. So yeah, that's kind of where we are.
And I should mention this question is not directly related to your deployment method. This is sort of a side question because neither, to my knowledge, none of the deployment methods come with an observability tool right now. So this is stuff people are adding on to it. So not directly related to deployment, but still interesting nonetheless to see what people are doing. Noah?
Yeah, I think probably the closest was the IL7 project had a very thorough explainer for how to add tick, which was one of these sort of all-in-one metrics and log management tools. And Docker makes it really easy if you do Docker correctly to pipe all of the output to a location like that. And so we just wrote up how do you do that for IL7, and the principles are the same for IL8 or whatever we're calling this now. So yeah, our old system is basically what you see written up in that tutorial in the IL7 docs area for how to use tick. I think though that tick does not appear to be a platform of the future. I think Grafana looks like it's the natural successor to that sort of or the natural winner in that space. And so I'm going to guess that we're going to land in Grafana, although we haven't made that transition completely yet.
Thank you. And Alex?
So we also don't really have much, and observability is a really exciting new area of interest for everyone, I think, by the sounds of things. And we also don't really have anything of note there to talk about. We have for monitoring, we've got a long-standing Nagios infrastructure that alerts our sysadmin when things are down, and it was very trivial to just add Islandora and some various endpoints to that. We don't really ever have a problem with things going down, though. Like Aaron mentioned, I think the thing we would be more interested in is if some microservice started using resources in a weird way or something. That would be a thing that we would love to have community come together and talk more about. And also queue monitoring. I think there has been some talk in the committers calls about having the ability to look at the queue from, for example, within Drupal using maybe an advanced queue or something like that. And also those things would also be very welcome, so to avoid having to do manual inspections of things.
And Luke?
So yeah, we use a variety of tools depending on if the client is in Amazon or if they're on site. We still use Nagios for a lot of our alerting, and we have quite a bit in Nagios today. We also use PagerDuty. So if certain issues happen, we get paged from within PagerDuty. We also have a central email account that gets various system level alerts and events that get sent to it. We also make use of AWS config, which monitors certain aspects of Amazon in the account, and if anything drifts from it, can tell us. We make heavy use of AWS guard duty, which can alert you if there's any suspicious traffic coming to and from your instances. So if it thinks it's compromised, it can actually alert you and tell you. Cloudwatch, we have a lot of stuff in Cloudwatch. We have a lot of lambdas that monitor, that are basically triggered by an action that can monitor different things. Like if a bucket fails to replicate to somewheres, it can tell us. Also, some of these can vary depending on if the clients, depending on what type of level of monitoring they have, but we also do Tripwire, which can tell you if anything changes on the system. So if something gets in your system compromises, a Tripwire can alert us that there's suspicious changes happening. Datadog's another thing that we've made heavy use of. It just has a cost associated with it, but it's fantastic for basically having you're monitoring all in one spot. It's actually intelligent. It can trace. It can kind of tell you if it thinks something's wrong, if something's out of the ordinary. It can actually intelligently highlight stuff. It's especially useful when you have massive logs and you're trying to find anomalies in them. It's quite useful. So yeah, we have quite a bit of different tools in the monitoring side. There's probably more I'm not even thinking of that we make use of.
Yeah, this is a great list so far. I personally have taken lots of notes. I find this very interesting. So from the more administrative side of deploying, in many institutions, it can be challenging to bring in new technology from a central IT point of view. Often, I'm wondering what some considerations are that you've run into on that front. For example, did you have any issues with working with central IT? Did you want to do something, but they said, no, we won't support that? Or maybe you've had no issues whatsoever. Or on your client's behalf, where it said, hey, can we do Docker? And they said, we don't like Docker. Have you run into anything along those lines of just on the administrative side of how to get a system in place? And I think, again, we can start with Eli.
Sure. So in terms of our sort of university IT, we don't work super closely with them. So we have where our cloud deployment is all AWS and a little bit of Wasabi, and our whole Islandora stack is up there. And so they manage the root account on the AWS account, but that's kind of it. Otherwise, they're pretty hands off on that. And in terms of, I don't work with external clients, so I don't have that luxury. But the one thing I would say in terms of, I guess, maybe just sort of like a roadblock, I guess, for us has just been, we're interested in ISLE and like pursuing a more Dockerized approach to deployment. But I think the big thing is just having staff and time to dedicate to that, because it'll take some training and some ramping up and some study and some testing in order to get really comfortable with it and able to use it in a production environment. So that's sort of our biggest hurdle there.
And Aaron?
Yeah, so one of the motivations for us, at least, to move to Kubernetes is that we run it in AWS, and so that makes it so that the platform, the production instance, the test instance, like all those instances are kind of outside of the domain of central IT. So that kind of gives us and our operations team quite a bit of flexibility and free reign, and removes considerable red tape, which is nice. However, well, and also I should add that the way we divide things up between the developers, Docker Compose, and Kubernetes and operations, kind of means that the developers don't necessarily have to deploy things in the cloud, and so we don't really have the permissions to break things because all we're doing is throwing images over the fence, which is kind of a nice degree of isolation. However, there have been pain points for us where we have to integrate with our central systems. And there are two areas of note. One is the authentication we use. We use simple SAML in Drupal to integrate with our institutions, with our institutional login. Now, we don't really have many use cases for people to need to log in, except if they are content creators or what have you. So the general public, like we don't have students or whatever log in, but it's mainly folks from the library who would need to create items, create collections, do ingests or what have you. But we use our institutional login for that. And so I think that was actually going back to a comment earlier. Noah mentioned using the stock build kit images. We don't. We basically have forked it because we had to make some changes to the base images to enable SAML, for example. And so we have some use cases that did require some changes, which probably ought to be made to upstream at some point, but just time. But the main pain point is administrative. Just getting the right metadata for being able to join the federation and accept the signed attributes from our institution's IDP. That's just a pain point that we had. Second pain point was sending email. So we have a feature whereby a user could send a question. So they type a form, and then Drupal will send off an email to folks in the library, and just being able to send that and connect to the mail infrastructure at Hopkins, that took probably a couple months to get everything necessary from central IT in order to do that, because the security hurdles in place are rather formidable, but and the processes are slow. So, so we avoided most of that by moving it out to the cloud, but, in places like, like email and authentication, those necessarily have to interact with central infrastructure. And those, for us have proven to be slow points, but there's really nothing, there's really nothing we can do that because we're part of an institution and we need to, abide by, whatever's necessary to interact with the critical infrastructure that we need to.
Thank you. Noah?
Yeah, so there's definitely been a large number of sort of pain points along the way, and we've sort of found the lay of the land for what works with this. Like I said, we try to be as consistent as possible across all of our sites. And so, for example, if you're running an older version of CentOS, it ships with an older version of Git, and that's going to cause all manner of havoc with our CI/CD systems, just because there's a couple of essential functions that came along in Git 2.0 that if you don't have, then you've got to rewrite a whole lot of tooling in terms of pushing and pulling and Git and automatically, triggering actions and so forth. Other things like that, load balancers upstream of the server that you don't have full control of are kind of tricky to work with sometimes, because sometimes it changes the request before it gets to you in a way that's, again, it's not impossible to handle, but it's just it's not the way all of our other projects work. So then we're making exceptions to exceptions and so forth. So we try to stay away from upstream load balancers where we can, but those are nice. So that's one where I'd like to crack that nut and be able to handle that really elegantly in ISLE. And I guess I should say, I see ISLE as having two parts. ISLE DC, which is sort of an example of how you can run the images that are created in the other half, which is ISLE Build Kit. So what I heard Luke saying was that ISLE didn't quite work for them. And I met, like, Luke, I'll throw this to you as a way to sort of expound upon that. But I imagine there's a bunch of those microservices or the images that are built from BuildKit, which probably suffice. But really, you're talking about the Docker Compose component you would configure differently, or would you go down all the way to the image level?
It was mostly around how the variables were being handled
Yeah.
within the images as well as the Composer project. It just we just looked at it. We spent quite a bit of time going through the various use cases. Also in trying to build something that just in the way we wanted to scale things and build things in the cloud. Right. We decided it would have been faster just to do it on our own. Otherwise, it would have led to forking it, kind of like with Aaron's case.
Yep.
And we really didn't want to get into forking it. So it was, we spent quite a bit of time going over and looking at it. It certainly had a lot of benefits and neat features to it. It was mostly around the variables that we kind of struggled with.
Yeah, that makes sense. And that lines up with our experience as well. So in my opinion, ILDC is a good entry point. It's a really good example of how you could use those images, but it addresses a relatively straightforward use case. And once you have a more complicated use cases, or you need this variability across multiple projects, yet maintaining some level of consistency, you're going to do what Luke and Aaron are talking about, or what we did, which was essentially run ILDC once, dump out the Docker Compose that comes out of that, and then work to optimize that. And so we maintain a Docker Compose that is our starter Docker Compose that has a different way of handling a bunch of things, including SSL and secrets and variables that get piped in from CI and stuff like that. So yeah, we try to take those constraints that you're talking about here, Bethany, and handle it in our version. But I recognize that the community projects don't, it's nice when we're able to contribute a little bit of that back, but it's also I recognize that we're building tooling that's really specific to our needs, and that's why we haven't contributed all of that back. Because it's tough to take something that's so specific and make it generally usable. Okay.
Yeah, I would also echo that, configuration and environment variables were, they're done quite well in BuildKit in general, but we did have a pain point with Drupal, and so we ended up we ended up having to, change the build kit images in our fork, for example, to expose environment variables to the Drupal instances, which are being run by PHP, FPM instances and Nginx, and pass those environment variables down, which isn't done by default, so that we could, do overrides in a settings.local.php and, reference environment variables using getenv, which was, helpful to us for breaking some log jams of configuration that we didn't want to bake in anywhere and wanted to override on a environment, specific basis, but, in Drupal. So, and as Drupal is its own, custom image, that's what we ended up doing. So there are some pain points there that we solved in that particular way.
And Alexander?
Sure. So I tend to have more issues on the development side than on the server side. Things generally tend to just run pretty smoothly because we're just running like, a pretty straightforward Ubuntu image at the end of the day. On the development side, there's an annoyance with IL build kit, and as well as Ansible, which is that it uses Composer for a lot of its tasks that get run over and over and over again. And sometimes you'll get hit with rate limiting from GitHub or some random place where a package lives. And I feel like on the server side, coming from an enterprise deployment, you would never rely on a service like that to actually deploy anything. You would have it in a Git or, direct file transfer. So it might be a good idea to model some better practices around that for things like, maybe distributing a VM again. I think that would probably be a good idea. On the server side, Ansible has become, and other people should kind of think of it as like one of your everyday sysadmin tools that you have if you need to do things on multiple images. The way that you probably want to end up doing it, because it'll save you a lot of work, is to come up with a little playbook to do the same task in multiple places. And it's kind of just one of the sort of very useful tools where even if and I think, maybe moving to using some of the IL built images for things like microservices where I really could care less how they work internally, we'd probably still end up orchestrating those with Ansible, just because it's a great straightforward tool where you can keep your configuration and your variables and your version control, and it has a Vault subsystem for securely storing passwords, which we use quite well, and we're pretty happy with.
Thank you. And Luke?
Hi. I've dealt with similar challenges that have been discussed. We try to work around, we try to work with a lot of different use cases, and it can lead to challenges. We've had a variety of scenarios where we've had everything from we've had even people with literally a bare metal machine that's like sitting in a room somewhere, and they've given us access to do stuff. We've had other scenarios where, it's been a highly secure environment that we sometimes can't even physically get to the machine. So it leads to where we're essentially walking them through an installation procedure to get everything on that they can do themselves. We do also work with Simple SAML PHP for single sign-on, and we've made pretty extensive use of that. We generally don't have a whole lot of issues, but it can take some back and forth with people to exchange the metadata and everything with Simple SAML PHP, which it can be challenging. It can be time consuming. Proxies and load balancers, again, yes, they can be an issue because it's something that you necessarily have no visibility or control into, that also can be problematic. And we've tried our best to try to adapt some of our processes that can work with all the scenarios, and that's why we make heavy use of, for example, SSM since it's not specific to like any particular type of setup. It doesn't care if it's on site or on a physical box, a VM, or even a container. Like, it doesn't really care. Like, so you can use it across a variety of technologies, and we made quite a bit of tooling in that help us control various updates and scripting and that. So yeah. So I guess at the end of the day, it can be a challenge. And I think like one thing we've always found is that there doesn't seem to be a silver bullet that quite meets everybody's needs. There's a lot of unique requirements, and we just try to do our best to have some sort of consistent framework that we can make work with everybody. And it is a challenge. It certainly is. And I understand from their side too. I mean, a lot of times they're large universities with, a larger central IT group that have their own policies and procedures that they kind of have to work around. So it's understandable. It really is. So yeah, I don't know if I have much more to add than that, but it certainly remains a challenge.
Thank you. That was very helpful. Yeah, I think everybody has so many variables that they're thinking about, from their developers to their system admins to their central IT, that it can be really complicated. And when you guys were talking, it made me think, oh, well, I should pause to see if anybody else has questions. I haven't seen any hands raised. Make space for that. So as you guys were talking, I was thinking about when you started with a method for deployment, you obviously have had to individualize it, sometimes a lot, sometimes maybe not a lot. Would you find that it's fair to say that, much like metadata, that folks doing deployments will end up individualizing the deployments, that's going to take a little bit of work? Would you say that assertion is true? That, I mean, as much as, well, I guess is what I'm curious about. So I'm very familiar with the IL form, although we have forked it, we have individualized it. And that makes it a little harder sometimes to give some of that back to the community, because it's set up for our site, much like Noah's setup is set up for his various clients. So I was just wondering, there's a question in here somewhere, I'm not sure it's well formed, but if you want to speak to that a little bit. Did you, when you started down the road you started down, did you feel like you had to do a lot of work to get it into a production site with whatever form you started with?
I think that's one of the biggest challenges with a lot of it, is to make it so it's as portable as possible to suit a lot of use cases. So like we have done quite a bit. We use this control repo in-house, and it's been done in a way that we can adapt it to a variety of scenarios. I think our largest, the most significant challenge, I think it's not even so much an installation issue. It's more around the content model and how I think that's where a lot of the uniqueness from different people come in, and that can be, I think that's where a lot of the challenges today exist, versus trying to individualize in installations. At least in our case, a lot of the challenges come around just how people want to use the content model, because it seems to be difficult to try to find one content model that works for everybody.
And Alexander?
Yeah, I'd echo that. Running Islandora is pretty, Islandora is, especially this new Islandora, is a really complicated beast. So was Islandora 7, but it was around a long time, and there was really good documentation for how to install it. I think that's a real shortcoming we have now is, for a long time, there was no good guide for, and I think probably to this day, the manual install instructions I haven't run myself. That's maybe the closest thing we have to, proper sysadmin side documentation. And But to speak to what Luke is talking about, I think that's another challenge on the kind of architecture side of Islandora itself. Like, we still don't have a lot of good examples of customizing content in a way that can also be shared. I think there was a lot of hope around Drupal features and Drupal exportable configurations that haven't really panned out just because of technical limitations of Drupal 8 and 9. And where Drupal 7 was a real, like, Islandora 7 was a real out of the box, you get what you get, unless you want to start editing some XSLT. That actually worked for a lot of people because it was decent out of the box. And we're kind of moving forward. I think that's more so than the server side issue and the deployment issue. I think the architecture of what Islandora is and how site builders should use it is a thing that's a little more of concern, I think, to me.
Yeah, I think that's, I mean, that sums it up. I think we as a open source project are struggling to understand how to share configuration if really what this is a configuration system. And that's something we just have to wrap our head around. But unfortunately, the state of the project is such that you can sort of spin things up as offered by the foundation, and you get a system which could technically do all the Islandora things, but doesn't behave like anybody expects an Islandora 7 site to behave. And so right now, I think the state of the project is that you either need a vendor or an on-site IT team with some development / DevOps team with some significant level of expertise, and not just expertise with Islandora 7, but expertise with like object-oriented Drupal PHP programming and DevOps tooling and stuff like that, in order to get to the level that you could have got to with Islandora 7. And that's not, like, that's an okay place, I guess, if you are in one of those scenarios. But if you're not an institution that has one of those things, or you don't have the money to hire a vendor or whatnot, then Islandora is not really available to you at the moment. So that's why we and Lyrasis put together that install profile to try to offer not something that was perfect, but something that like delivered on 80–90% of the Islandora 7 user experience. And I'm hoping that the sprint that's ongoing is going to allow people to very quickly get to that point. And we can use that as a way to, like, springboard from that, solve the problems that are in that install profile, rather than starting from scratch and working up again to that point, or rather just use that as a starting point and fix the problems with it. I don't mind admitting that there are problems with it, and I'd love to collaborate on solving them.
I think, I really appreciate you saying that just deployments are hard. Like it's a hard problem to solve, and it sounds like no matter which direction or road you go down, be prepared to put some time into it, and effort. Aaron?
Yeah, well, I would also just echo what everybody else has been saying. For us at least, like we weren't a Drupal shop prior to, we weren't a Drupal shop, and we did not have, we were not coming from Islandora 7. And so, the content modeling, what was kind of a fundamental issue that we were kind of in the position of having to solve. And, we're a big R1 institution, and like, we basically had to enlist the help of 2 vendors, to pull them in and, help us out, because, it was just, it was just, a lot to consider. And, I would agree that, a lot of, the philosophy of Islandora 8 is kind of, hands off. You can let Drupal be Drupal, but then you kind of have to make decisions that have consequences. You know, the folks in the library have a certain, view on, metadata and stuff, which requires, updating config as such. But that also means that, whatever relationship we had with Islandora defaults, that relationship doesn't exist anymore. We're kind of doing our own thing. And so what are best practices? What are good choices to make? What sort of choices, in modeling will cause us trouble down the road? And just getting a handle on that was darn near impossible. So, I haven't looked at the install profile stuff, but it was definitely not anything that was turnkey out of the box worked. It was a lot more work than we were, thinking it would be coming into it. And so, in addition to that, I think one of the, additionally, one of the factors which I think is, at least to me, seemed to be overlooked was once you have an existing site, then you need to be careful about the kind of changes that you do make, in the sense that, if you put a stake in the ground as far as modeling and want to evolve that, there are nuances and, pain points of, now having to do migrations on existing content. And so, this is one of the aspects that kind of, relates to the deployment and development environments. So we kind of realized that would be a pain point, and we didn't really have the knowledge to know what was safe and not safe, et cetera. So we ended up, we forked build kit images. We also, used ILDC as a starting point, but we, basically forked that, and we added a, functionality. We added the ability to have snapshots, which are pre-existing database state that, the stack starts on. And so, like, if, for example, we make an incompatible change to the configuration, like change like title length, but oh no, it's already set in the database, a migration is needed. We would find that during CI because, you try to make that change and you just can't do it without, something else to make, to do a migration of existing data. So we leveraged, ILDC for being able to add a stage where we find those sort of things before they hit production. And that was something that we weren't also intending, we kind of discovered along the way that, we had to consider, there's a big difference between, installing an Islandora from scratch and on a existing maintaining system. And that's kind of how on existing systems. And that's kind of, this snapshots are, in the development environment are one way that we, started handling that, so we can at least know what we're up against earlier in the process during development than later on. And part of that was, might have been our lack of familiarity with Drupal in general, but, we kind of evolved our coping mechanisms and, leveraged IL in a way that helped us out. But but definitely the content modeling and evolving models it has been a definite, probably the most significant challenge as far as I'm concerned.
Would you say coffee is a coping mechanism?
Yeah, well, my cup is empty. So.
Because I did a lot of the content stuff at JHU, and I definitely got caught in that churn of having a database set up differently from what I just changed field wise, and then having to sort of figure out how to realign them, which wasn't too hard, and it did settle out over time. So if when you do start to work on this and your content model becomes set, it gets a whole lot easier. And Eli, would you like to have a chance?
Yeah, I guess the only thing I would say is, Yeah, we spent a significant amount of time working on our content model and designing our metadata fields and what they were going to look like. And we don't use basically anything from Islandora defaults. It's all custom. And we worked for months, literally months, with our metadata librarians to figure all that out.
And everybody's going to go through that regardless of which deployment method you choose. It's
Yeah.
just plan that time.
Yeah. And the other thing to kind of go back to what Noah was saying about the install profile, and I know Alex has worked on some profile stuff too, that's something that I'd really like to see sort of come out of, if not this sprint, of near future stuff, is that we've had kind of multiple methods to spin up something, some out of the box or demo experience. You know, you've got this sort of sandbox thing, you've got what the playbook spins up. And now there's also this profile. Like, we have lots of different ways, and I'd love to kind of see like all of those methods either converge or be similar, that, you know, whether you're using Ansible or ISLE, that you can kind of spin up kind of the same sort of out of the box experience for people to get as much as they can of an example setup. Yeah.
Thank you. Just looking at the time, and this is intended to wrap up at 11:30 so that there's a half hour for questions. And the questions can be about anything, so not necessarily deployments. So if you're out there and you have a question, feel free to toss it out. Doesn't matter what it's about. Presumably Islandora at the very least. But so before we wrap this up, I was just wondering if you guys wanted to offer any piece of advice to folks who are probably currently working on this or will be, are thinking about it. And I would just say, feel free to jump in.
Maybe, sorry, if you could ask the question.
Sure.
I'm wondering if any of you are running multi-sites, and if so, how you're configuring, and also with respect to how you are handling shared taxonomies and whatnot.
So multi-sites was on our no-go list. We decided we're not touching multi-sites. So I don't have anything useful there. When you talk about shared taxonomy, are you talking about external references, or are you talking about like access control or something like that?
I guess taxonomies with respect to sort of, you know, the controlled access terms, whatever the controlled access terms.
Yeah.
So local taxonomies, I guess that can point to external sources as well.
Noah, why did you rule out multi-site?
Oh, because it's really a nightmare. Like that there are other ways of handling the optimizations you get from using Drupal multi-sites that don't come with a lot of the nightmare of handling Drupal multi-sites in conjunction, especially if you're using Fedora. Right? If you're not using Fedora, maybe Drupal multi-sites is still a viable option. But if you are putting Fedora behind this thing, you're either in for a world of pain, or you're going to replicate, you're going to have separate Fedoras for everything, which almost defeats the purpose of having Drupal multi-sites to begin with. So my advice is really take a hard look at that and see if you can architect this in a way that doesn't involve Drupal multi-sites. Because for simple Drupal sites, it delivers a huge payoff. But for complex Drupal sites, you'll just tie yourself up, I think, worse than if you had separate sites.
I guess what I meant to ask was that not just Drupal multi-site, maybe handling multiple sites with same backend. So same Fedora, Zoller, and image server, but maybe handling different sites to serve different projects.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, this gets to, Luke was talking about scaling, and this is one aspect of scaling, especially if you're running Docker, right? You can just have a suite of multi-sites up, and you can have 15 webheads, and they're all using the same web services on the back end. They don't even have to be running on the same server. You can run your services in one cluster, and you can be running all of your webheads in a different place. As long as the network connections are relatively quick, you don't even notice that. So that's what I mean about, you know, the options for architecting here are tremendous.
I think he might have Fedora in the mix though. Is what might be the possibility there that we have done multi-sites ourselves within the context of not having Fedora in the mix, where basically just you have multiple S3 buckets and you have one associated with each site, and we have some of our own tooling that allows for the exporting of the metadata into the bucket. So I mean, we have done that, but it does come with its own set of challenges. And actually, in terms of Fedora, I imagine Eli might have a few things to say, because I actually just was talking to him about this a couple days ago. So he might actually have something regarding Fedora and multi-sites. If you care to talk about it, Eli.
Yeah, so we do have a multi-site setup. So we have our institutional repository and our digital collections site, and they're together. They're part of a Drupal multi-site. And so we're using the same Fedora as the backend, but they point to different routes in Fedora. So like everything from one site hangs off of one route, and then everything from the other hangs off another route. And then, it's the same set of microservices in the backend. It's, the same Zoller, but with two different cores. We actually use the same S3 bucket, but different folders in each, similar to the Fedora root. It's one S3 bucket with two folders. And then obviously separate RDS instances for our databases. But yeah, it's all pretty much shared.
Is that Fedora 5 or 6 that you're using?
5.
5. Okay.
Yeah, I tried to migrate to 6, but it didn't happen.
There's a little upgrade tooling now that wasn't there a month or two ago. It's better. We did that.
Okay, I haven't looked at it in a couple months, so I'll have to revisit.
Yeah. But yeah, the Fedora thing, like the thing that people have to understand about Fedora and Islandora in 8 that makes multi-sites really hard, unless you do what Eli did, is that Fedora is sort of a secondary deposit location for assets you put in through the Drupal front door. So imagine you have a whole bunch of Drupal front doors, all these multi-sites, and they're all writing to the same Fedora. There's nothing that takes data that's in Fedora and repropagates it back out to the multi-sites. So if you're sharing objects between your Drupal sites, it's not going to work for you unless you write your own actions to take things that are changed in Fedora and bring them back into a whole bunch of Drupal multi-sites. Because in Islandora 8, I'm going to keep calling it that because it's stuck in my head that way. Drupal is the repository of record, not Fedora, right? And that's a hard thing to sort of switch the mindset on.
I would concur that that's something that I think I guess that's my biggest advice for people as well, is to, like, in Islandora 7, Fedora was the source of truth. That's where all your data was. That's where you're getting it. In Islandora 8, it's Drupal. Like that's where your data is. Like that's where the objects are created. Then it just gets synced out to Drupal, or sorry, Fedora. And that's where the challenges come in multi-sites.
Yeah, I think
Yeah, and I'll
multi-sites.
just add, sorry.
Go ahead.
No, yeah, I'll just add that, we when we deployed it, we made the decision not to use Fedora since in the Drupal 8 plus or the Islandora 8 plus architecture, Drupal is the system of record. So there wasn't, for our case, we weren't doing any, the site we're building isn't an archive or anything. So Fedora was not providing any value. So we decided to take that out and, just have Drupal write to S3, which worked pretty well. But we were we haven't delved into even in that simplified setup, we haven't delved into multi-sites, maybe someday, but it's just, above our level, at this point, and we don't really have a use case for it. I will say that, there is, some support for multi-sites in the build kit images, which, it kind of make things a little bit harder to understand, why things are done a particular way, because, I think build kit tends to have a bit of complexity for, being able to handle the multi-site use cases, which, since we don't have those use cases, it's just a bit of a slightly increased, cognitive load just to understand those type of things and understand that, things are done in a particular way just in order to get around some nuance to multi-sites, which, we don't really have those nuances, but it's just something to watch out for.
Yeah, I think those came from Nigel to support some Lyrasis use cases. And I don't see anybody here from Lyrasis to speak to that, but that would be an interesting perspective to bring into the next one of these conversations.
It sounded like, Alexander, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, sorry, I was trying to figure out whether my microphone wasn't muting or not. But anyway, yeah, I think for the reasons why you would often want to run multi-sites, like you have, I think a good practice now would be to have like a big site that maybe isn't publicly visible, that is your repository, it's your archive, and that's a full Islandora stack, or as much as you want of it. And then perhaps you want to make a dedicated site for an event or for a collection. I would probably, in that case, not spin up another Islandora instance. I would probably set up a regular Drupal site and maybe deploy something like feeds to pull in a subset of your content from the other site. And then that doesn't need to stick around. It's not a source of truth. And you have a much more flexible way of, consuming data from your archive and putting it into other places. Feeds is extremely powerful and it's quite user-friendly. It can all be done with the user interface. You don't have to deal with like migration stuff. So, if that's your use case for needing to run multiple sites, is to have like different presentations, I would probably say, yeah, mostly those wouldn't need to be Islandora sites at all.
I'd actually like to build on what Alex is saying here. We actually do have one of our clients that is using Drupal as the repository, and they actually have a completely separate front end that they're utilizing the REST API to actually get the data they want out of it. So, I mean, you can, as he's saying, you could still actually have the shared infrastructure in the back end, whatever it may be, and you could just have separate front ends that are hitting the REST API on your Drupal site. So you still have the one repository, potentially the one Fedora. You just have separate front ends like that are using it, and we have seen people successfully doing stuff like that.
So I wanted to say thank you all for participating in this panel. I really appreciate it. Feel like I learned a lot, and I've been doing this for a while, so hopeful the other folks enjoyed it as well. And what I thought we could do is maybe stop recording, go back to the normal view with everybody on the screen. If you guys want to stick around and stay on camera, maybe people have more questions. And folks should feel free to ask questions about anything with Islandora at this point. And thank you, Noah. I know you need to leave, so thanks for being here.
Absolutely. I'll leave my email in the chat if folks want to ask questions.